Okay, so the next game that we have is Flashback, The Quest for Identity, developed by Delphine Software International, published by US Gold, released on lots of platforms, originally on the Amiga, but also for the Sega Genesis, Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, Jaguar, PC, many others. First released in 1992. It's a cinematic platformer where you control Conrad B. Hart as he loses his memory, has his memory wiped by aliens, finds himself on a distant planet, gets shot down and lands on the moon of Titan and tries to recover everything from there, defeat the aliens, save the planet, and all that other good sci-fi stuff. Initial thoughts on Flashback, people, for anyone who's played it?
I do have one question I'd like to ask for you. There are so many versions of this game. Which one is your favorite, would you say?
I would say that it's best on the Mega Drive, or Genesis rather. It just controls that a bit better. I mean, I'd say that the Super Nintendo version is also good, but there's a couple of little changes that don't really make much sense and kind of loses a bit of the atmosphere of the game. It's not too bad on PC actually as well. The graphics are a bit better with it. Amiga is all right, but well, it's good, but the Mega Drive is the best.
I imagine the controller really hurts on the Amiga.
That gives me a moment to point out. Apparently, Flashback. I didn't test this, so if it doesn't work, don't beat me up over this. But apparently, Flashback is one of the few Amiga games which does support multiple controller inputs. If you take a Mega Drive standard controller, plug it into your Amiga, it will actually read multiple buttons, so you can actually play it.
Never actually tested that out.
Apparently, yeah. Now I've read that maybe the Amiga's not good for Mega Drive controllers. Like it can eventually short them out anyway. But they didn't care about that back in 1992. You know, this didn't matter. No one cared. You could actually buy a controller.
Yeah, I've never had a problem with that on my Amigas. I've generally always used the Mega Drive controllers. I think it's earlier computers than that's you shouldn't use it.
Okay.
With the Commodore 64, you should definitely not use a Mega Drive controller.
Because I've seen some warnings about using these controllers, like maybe they don't always work. So I'm like, well, I'm not gonna tell you to destroy your vintage electronics, but I don't want to get blamed for people breaking their controllers. But no, apparently it does. So that's cool, and yeah, they're all good versions. So this game is you wake up in a jungle, and I think that it is one of the coolest intros to a game ever. Like ever. This is just very, very cool. My favorite part of the game is the first 15 seconds of the game because it's so cool.
So you feel so immediately. It just sums up like the alien world perfectly. You're just alone. You have no idea, and you've seen the intro before, but you have no idea what you're actually supposed to be doing, really.
No, it's extremely evocative. You've got this guy, he's running, there's all these cool sci-fi lasers, he's being chased, there's a jet bike, through the sky, he gets shot down, crashes into a jungle. You still don't know where you are. I mean, maybe the manual says, but nobody read the manual, and even if it did, it doesn't matter. You probably forgot already. You wake up in a jungle, it's amazing science fiction jungle, you know, none of this garbage video game, generic tiley sort of scrub bush crap. No, it's giant, huge vines, just jungle for days. You're standing on all this curvy stuff, and then you hear this
type thing.
Yeah, very heavy metal. That's sort of French, art style for sci-fi. And then you just hear this constant ping sound because it's this sci-fi noise just breaking through this jungle. It's very cool. And then you pick up a cube.
It has kind of the whole Total Recall thing of you're watching yourself back and it recorded it sometime earlier.
I was gonna say this game feels like there's a lot of Total Recall going on it. Maybe a little bit of Blade Runner too.
There's a lot of things.
Yeah.
The cinematic influence in Flashback. I mean, Paul Cuisset, the guy who made it, is a big movie fan. You can just tell it. There's Total Recall stuff, as you say, Blade Runner, kind of sci-fi books. Actually, one interesting fact about the game is that it was actually originally going to be a licensed game based on The Godfather.
Yes. Yeah, it was. It's so good. I love it.
Well, yeah, it was going to be based on The Godfather. US Gold had the license at the time, their publishers. because they'd started working with Delphine after Another World. And they said, hey, see what you can do with the Godfather license. And Paul Crusay had this weird idea of, like, why don't we do a sci-fi Godfather game? We have, like, the mafia in space on alien planets and that. This weird idea.
I almost kind of wish that was a thing now.
Yeah, it couldn't have been worse than Godfather 3, at least.
Anyway, go ahead, I'm sorry.
And, yes, US and I think US Gold, I think they kind of gave it to US Gold to have a look at, and they're like, tell us what you think. And US Gold were like, no, that's not what we wanted you to do with it at all. But obviously they still had Flashback, and it's kind of worth speaking out, I think, because one weird thing about Flashback is that the second level of it is so long. Second level is probably about as long as, like, a good chunk of the rest of the game put together.
No,
and one reason for that might be because perhaps originally all those little submissions that you do, because if you're not familiar with the game, in the second level you're on the surface of Titan, Saturn's moon, and you're kind of doing little jobs. You have to build up enough credits to go on a killing game show, and there you get a ticket back to Earth. So you have to do all these little jobs. You have to find work, essentially. And in the original Godfather game, it might well have been that actually you were doing, like, contracts. He has, like, a associate or soldier in the mob, perhaps. It's kind of worth speculating as potentially one of the avenues that a Godfather game would have gone if that's what had happened.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah. What's cool about the second level is it really sets a tone for the game in that it's not just a strictly to totally linear platformer. It is, but you actually are given the ability to get in a little taxi car, and it takes you to different areas within that thing, and you get to talk
Asia, America, kind of the 1984 thing going as well.
Yeah, and that's
very great, very atmospheric, and very so I love that sort of like sci-fi, but it's not all clean, which is one of the things that the remake of it got drastically wrong.
There is.
Let's the remake.
We're not very fond of the remake. Let's put it like that.
It's very bad.
Well, the problem with the remake is that it went, okay, well, I don't know if Flashback plays that well, so we'll throw out the whole game and start again instead of just let's make the gameplay maybe a little bit more palatable to modern audiences. Yeah. But also keep the style of the game. They keep a few gags and jokes, and the plot's mostly the same, but it feels complete. It doesn't really feel very Flashback. It feels like a knockoff of a Shadow Complex in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it has that. There's kind of a lot of things just taken from into games time, as if because I mean, Crusay did the remake as well, as if he was just kind of flapping around trying to find stuff that worked that he could shove into Flashback, and it didn't need it at all.
Yeah, I mean, if the original Flashback is a culmination of a lot of 80s sci-fi influences, you really didn't want to be taking influences from 2000s era sci-fi. There's not a great deal of really memorable sci-fi from that period. So there's good movies, but I don't think there's nearly as many kind of just such strong titles. But so Flashback, as you said, is a cinematic platformer, and the best way to describe that is Prince of Persia, because most people have hopefully played a Prince of Persia game, so you kind of know where it's going to be coming from, or a game that's been inspired by it. So it's a very deliberate game in your movement. You don't get if you decide I don't want to go that way. Too bad, because you started going that way and you're already jumping. No take backsies.
You have the momentum. It's almost like a grid system, and it's always very rigid in that you have to do 3 running steps before you can do a running jump. And you have there's always, and the level's always designed very deliberately. I mean, that was kind of one of the things with Prince of Persia. It kind of it introduced the genre almost, and pretty much perfected it in that virtually all cinematic platforms from that point on were based around that design. And so yes, it has it's a lot heavier feeling than the traditional platformer is.
Do you know what really messes me up a lot when I play? It's not as bad on the Genesis / Mega Drive version, but every time you have that little slight delay when the screen goes black between screens, it really throws off my timing, and that has killed me a lot.
Yeah, that's one of the pains. That's perhaps one of the reasons why PC might be one of the best ways to play it now, because it doesn't have that.
Yes, the Genesis has to reload everything basically between screens. The game does have a very unusual input system, and I think it's a Delphin thing. I don't know. Delphin had this idea of how their input should work, which contradicts every other sort of game ever made. But basically, if you put an input through, the game will remember you've pushed that button. So, if you're running through a screen and you're about to transition to another screen, if you just hold down the jump button, or up in this case, because it's up, there's no jump button. Then the moment the screen transition completes, the moment you can actually jump, Conrad will jump. He'll just be like, "Yep, okay, done." So you just got to kind of do a little bit of pre-planning, and that is part of the cinematic platform. It's about, I need to be there, so I need to time it. So I go step, 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 jumps, and you just, as long as you keep that in mind, you can usually hash it out. This game has an interesting couple of shortcuts. They tweak the controls a bit, which is really cool. Secret manual guide. If you just hold down the direction and then hold down the run button, if you release the direction key, if there's a upwards jump, you'll just automatically take it from that point, which is
that was infamous back in the day.
Yeah.
I mean, I got stuck on that quite a lot because you have to do one of those right at the start of the second level. There's no other way to do that jump, and it was a pit of, because I'm not sure if the manual explained it quite as well as it could have, and what you actually had to do that jump. So it's kind of like a bit like the kind of nut barrel sort of thing.
It's interesting because we were discussing this before, but it was like they've included these things as bizarre copyright, copy protection systems that if you would overlook them or not have the manual, and then you would be like, well, I'm stuck and I can't figure it out. And
you
it's
mean like the freaking door near the end of the game?
Freaking door. What a great door.
That door is a jerk.
Unfortunately, I've always been really bad at this game. That's a couple of reasons, if I can speak on that real quick.
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
One is that, like I said, it's really easy to have your timing mess up and just fall to your death. And when that happens, you can lose a lot of progress. There are checkpoints in the levels, but they're kind of few and far between, so whenever you die, you can lose a big chunk of time.
It can get most annoying when you accidentally tap left or right, and then Connor's like, all right, I'll jump off a cliff. And you're like, no, don't, oh, damn it. And then he just thump.
You do have to be deliberate and just not desperately hammer buttons, because then you just end up rolling twice and then jumping and then falling off a cliff, or just jumping straight into one of those pits of fire or whatever.
One other thing real quick. There are a lot of points in this game where the game wants you to find items that are very difficult to find. You kind of have to scout around and wait for your HUD to say there's something nearby you, and it's not always easy to see.
A lot of the objects are pretty small. I'd say they're obvious in the sense that a lot of them are geometrically shaped, and early on in the jungle you can spot them because they're the only square block thing on the entire screen. But it can get a little trickier in some of the busier areas. I do actually think that the first level is quite well designed. If you explore every option in every screen, you'll bounce where you need to go, and you're just like, okay, I go here, I can't go anything here, so I got to go somewhere else, and you will. It will unfold itself quite well, and the second stage does quite a good job too, because even though you can get on the taxi cabs, you still have you get given direction the whole time. You go to the correct place, and the guy's like, you got to go see this guy at the bar, so you go see him, and then he's like, well, I need money to pay, so you got to go get the jobs, and then the jobs teleport you around and tell you where to go. So it all fits together really nice, and there's even a map, which I like. It gives you a map for the that area. There's no auto map of the actual levels, but they're not too convoluted. I think the game starts to fall apart a little bit as the levels get bigger and they stop having other elements to them, because when you get to the dance strip club area, then the prison, and help please the alien world place. They're really huge levels, and they're not super friendly about it.
Oh, no. I think one thing that kind of does change the game a little when it gets to its final third is getting the teleport. That helps.
Yes.
There's some nice little creative solutions that stops, because otherwise you'd have to do some pretty nasty leaps of faith.
Yeah, I like that, the way the game very slowly feeds you kind of new things, because you don't get that many new things, but they're reasonably substantial, the new things that they give you.
Yep.
When you get the shield, which acts as an early cover-based sort of system, and you get the teleporter. I feel like the game could have used maybe one or two more interesting or fun items to mess around with to really sell.
One thing that I quite like in the game that you pretty much don't really use at all is the mouse. That kind of moves around, but there's not really that many points at all where you end up using it.
And I don't know if it's because maybe they were actually making the game like from start to finish, so they started at level 1 and then just made it level 2, 3, 4, and they're just like, okay, we're running out of time, we gotta finish this game, come on, and they were just kind of smashing it together as quick as they could, because I think this game does run out of steam a little bit. I love the alien world visually, and I love the way that creepy alien shapeshifters like move and ooze around levels and stuff. I think this game has gorgeous animation, beyond gorgeous.
It's from the makers of Out of This World, or Another World's case may warrant, so it better look pretty darn good when they set that standard
from
already.
The publisher, or
yeah, I know. But
different people.
I only found out recently that Eric Chahi actually wasn't involved in Flashback. And yet, in my mind, I kind of conflated it as being Another World 2, which is, I know, totally wrong and inaccurate.
Yeah, it was often called, I think even in that magazines at the time, some people go, oh, it's the sequel to Another World.
Darn.
Yeah, it did happen. It was, so it's just kind of that little bit of misinformation, because they're obviously such similar games.
Yeah,
in many ways.
It does share some stylistic similarities while ending up as a different beast altogether. There was an actual sequel, Heart of the Alien, but like not a lot of people like that, and Eric Chahi. Yeah, let's not go there.
But the interesting thing is, I do wonder if Delphin was pushing it as a sequel to Another World, or if that was just American magazines not really paying attention.
Good question. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I wonder also again how much US Gold might have had to do with that as well. Like, I think a lot of the marketing that I've seen is certainly the marketing mentions Another World a lot. So it is possible perhaps that either they kind of alluded to it being a sequel, or people who print magazines just put 2 and 2 together and made 5.
I do want to say real quick about the graphics. I feel like the vector sort of polygon look is actually still looks pretty good for this day and age, and especially now that I forget exactly what they did with the more modern re-release of this game, but it ends up looking even better than it used to. So it's a look that has definitely aged well, I would say.
Are you talking about Flashback or Another World there, though? Because
Flashback.
Another World was originally done purely in vector, so it was very easy to upscale, and that's why it gets some really cool redevelopments. But I don't think Flashback has been re-released that much, has it?
There's a couple. Well, there is an updated graphics version that is more contemporary, the PC and Jaguar versions. You can, I'm not sure how much they did on it, but you can play the original on the remake.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
What? Wow, so you can pay for the original game, and then like it has this whole other game which sucks, but it's there for free. So, it's to it for the price of. I mean, I'm looking at footage of the remake right now. I'm just kind of snickering here. It looks like generic as all hell. It
is generic.
That's really the
early 2010s platformer.
Yeah.
So sad to take a game which is so. I genuinely think Flashback is one of the most visually interesting games of the 16-bit era, because it takes such a different and I actually really like the French microcomputer development scene from that period, because it doesn't feel like American games, it doesn't feel like Japanese games, it doesn't even feel like kind of British games. It has its own feeling to it, and I think Flashback is one of the games that most exemplifies this aesthetic and this style of development and game.
Yeah, just those slight little differences. I mean, because France is Yeah, kind of as far as like European games goes, Strange Face, obviously Infogrames originally came from there, tried to become one of the biggest publishers around, but they always had different tastes to what the norm is. I mean, Amstrad CPC was the big computer over there in the 80s, certainly up there, and then Atari ST after that, as opposed to Spectrum and C64, then Amiga. So they kind of had differing tastes, and also kind of idiosyncratic. Obviously, French media kind of contributes to that as well, I suppose.
Yeah, and it results in Flashback being a very interesting and different game. And I would say a little bit harder to palate, especially if you're coming at it with no other cinematic platformer experience. And from a modern perspective, because I don't really know how you'd handle this. It lacks a lot of niceties that you might expect.
Yes, checkpoints and such.
The checkpoint system, I think, is one of the biggest marks against this game. I think
There's
going
a lot of
forward,
death.
Yeah.
It's hard to get around playing the game for 10, 15 minutes and then dying and being like, oh, cool, I'm back at the thing that I got to kill all those enemies again. All of them. Every single one. They were hard to kill, and I got to do it again.
Yeah.
And there are some bits also where it's really hard to not take a hit. Like some bits, it kind of feels like virtually impossible to not take a hit, which is kind of bad design.
And not uncommon for the era either.
I agree with that.
Hero
But
games.
at least the shield generators are somewhat common, and at least early on, you can at least walk back and recharge if you ever need to.
In a lot of the later segments, because the enemies do not respawn, that's cool. You know, if you don't die, the enemies stay dead generally, which is cool. And actually, some corpses stay on screen, some corpses don't, but it depends on the enemy. The recharge stations, towards the back half of the game, you will probably be killing some enemies, looking at your health and going, oh, I got no health left, I'm just gonna trek back to that recharge station, even if it's several screens back, because it's just not worth chancing it.
Yeah.
Especially when you get to the morphs.
No kidding, I was friggin'... I feel as I hadn't said nearly as much about this game as I could have. I do really like it, but we have admitted it. Its difficulty is really rugged, and I think its controls can occasionally be counterintuitive, but I just like how this game looks more than anything. I mean, it plays decent, but really I think its graphics are the major tour de force reason for checking it out more than anything. Before we get into ranking, though, I did want to make one erroneous point about its subtitle, The Quest for Identity. Don't you pretty much learn who you are the instant you get to New Washington?
Oh, yeah, well, that's silly American subtitles.
Yeah, it's interesting. Outside of America, this game was just called Flashback, and for some reason they really wanted to play up the amnesia plotline.
So my country is stupid. That actually kind of makes sense. Okay, I can buy the explanation.
You're just figuring that out?
Yeah, well, let's not get into...
Would you guys say this is the best cinematic platformer of the 16-bit era, compared to, say, Blackthorn, Prince of Persia 2, and some other games I'm probably forgetting?
If you're forgetting Another World, then yeah, you forgot Another World.
That's not quite the same kind of game, I'd say. Not the...
I think Another World is the most cinematic platformer ever produced. It is the pinnacle gold standard. If you're going strictly exactly like Prince of Persia clones, Flashback might be, but Another World is better. I don't think I think it's a very tricky one to argue, because Another World's difficulty doesn't spike in the same way that Flashback's does, and
it can be nasty in some places, though, Another World, but it has the checkpoints.
Yeah.
Yes,
definitely.
It doesn't force you to go to checkpoint machines to get your checkpoints in.
I do personally like Another World better, but Flashback, whether or not it is really a direct successor, I think really is nonetheless a fantastic sophomore such type of this game from Delphine, and probably the last game everybody really liked them for. I mean, I can't really qualify that statement, because I know we have some Shaq Fu fans out there. One is among us in this very podcast.
Where would they be hiding? You'd never know it. Just listening to them that they love Shaq Fu and would want more Shaq Fu.
Cal loves
they
Shaq
did
Fu,
a
by the way.
Moto Racer after that, which
Yeah, that was quite popular.
yeah.
Hey, good deal.
While you talk about popularity, I believe Flashback was the best-selling French video game of the 16-bit era. I think it was. I think it was.
I do believe so. Yeah.
So
Lots of copies.
I don't know if you could say that Delphin would ever get to that level again. Like, best-selling French video game. Like, well, that's cool. I don't think they could top themselves on that one, but. I don't know, like, was Delphin ever a company that people really saw the name of and went, Delphin, I can trust them. Like, they just seem to,
At that time, they were maybe after Another World and Flashback, but then not after that.
A brief twilight of interesting games.
It's really too bad they didn't make more games. I guess they were one of the companies who just didn't quite have the funds when the 32-bit era hit.
The entire
little company,
Yeah.
Delphine. They're originally their actual origin rather. Delphine is a music label in France, a record label, or was anyway. I do believe, and they used to do easy listening records. And then back in the 1980s, they decided that we'll get into this video game thing, and so they so the bosses at Delphine, or wherever the whole mother label was, decided to built it up from there. And they kind of started with point and clicks, some probably not very well remembered point and clicks now, things like Future Wars, Cruise for a Corpse. Yeah, it's one of those.
I love the name Cruise for a Corpse.
That game.
Yeah,
It's such a funny name. Cruise for a Corpse.
And then one
Weekend
day
at Bernie's
Chakey-
3.
One day,
Sorry?
Chakey pretty much came in and said, "Guys, look what I've been working on,"
Yeah.
and that kind of changed their fortunes.
Magic.
Well, because he and Paul Crusat were working on Future Wars together, so that's their main connection. Is they both spent
Yes.
some time making the game together. But it is interesting, and Delphin went bankrupt trying to release a Game Boy Advance version of Flashback, which is
Yep,
cool
they got
little-
it to a beta stage. There is or beta rather. There's a beta online, which plays okay. I mean, it's still a little buggy, and it still has the old. I'm presuming it's the original. It's the original Flashback sprite, which I'm presuming is a placeholder because the other art style is totally different.
yeah.
And of course, there was Fade to Black as well, which we haven't mentioned. The 3D attempt, which was a bit early.
I like the best word is attempt. That fits the bill for what Flash Fade to Back is.
It was. I mean, it didn't really. I think it was perhaps if it had been released, if they'd spent a bit longer on it, then it would.
Fade to Black's a very tricky one because at the time it was reasonably well received because it was a trailblazer in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
but
there was very little around it. I think it was received well until Tomb Raider came out.
yeah, it was this very short
Which then
window.
took the mantle. Tomb Raider itself is very cinematic platformer influenced in its design.
Yeah, then we haven't got to look at Tomb Raider yet, but we do have to look at Flashback, and that means we got to put Flashback in our list. Where the heck does Flashback go?
For me, I would say I'm thinking somewhere in the 40s and 50s. Between 41 and 50 for me. But I'm a bit biased, so...
No, that seems like a reasonable place to put it, but between specifically what two games?
Well, I would...
My kind of argument against that perhaps would be that although Flashback is probably as good a game as Another World in many ways, Another World is the more influential game. I'm not sure, have you covered Another World yet?
Sadly,
No,
no.
we
I would
have
like
not.
to someday. We'll say
That for me would deserve that sort of spot, perhaps more than Flashback does, even if I think Flashback is a better game in my opinion.
Our listeners have a tendency to give us the wrong games. They do that a lot.
well, not the wrong one. It's just kind of hard to get into one sometimes.
I would have a hard time putting it in our list. I'd be struggling to put it above the specific just post 50 range. We've got Contra Hard Corps, Ranger X, and Ikaruga, which I think all of those are kind of just as successful as Flashback, but are probably more playable, especially when you get further into them. it's a little tricky in terms of I think Flashback is a fantastic visual game, a fantastic sort of... Games don't have to look kiddie, they don't have to look silly, and they don't have to be super grim, dark, violent things to be mature, which I think is one of my favorite things about Flashback, is that Flashback doesn't feel like a game for children. It doesn't feel like a kid's game, but it also doesn't feel like it's, I'm a mature 15-year-old who likes boobies and violence. Like, it doesn't feel like that either.
Oh, no, not so.
It's an actual, like, just mature in a very actual physical way. Like, it's just like, yeah, it's presented as a realistic world thing, and it doesn't handhold you or do anything that kind of makes it feel like it's a game. It's like, no, it's a cinematic game.
That's the sort of edginess that perhaps something like Blackthorn has.
Yeah,
it's not quite on the level of edge as Blackthorn, for good or worse.
Definitely for better compared to...
Yeah, for better.
I still like Blackthorn, but...
I don't mind Blackthorn, but yeah, it is a bit mid-90s in that way.
Oh, no kidding. That's... I'm not...
I would say I would probably prefer Flashback a little more than Blackthorn, because I'd say it offers more variety in terms of locations and gameplay.
I'd say so too.
Well, you've seen everything you need to see in Blackthorn within the first 10 to 15 minutes. At least Flashback kind of gives you a bit more interesting levels. You're like, okay, I want to see where this is going. I think towards the end, you'll be like, oh, maybe I don't want to see where this is going at this point. It's just kind of... It wears you down quite heavily, I think, Flashback. Especially if you don't have a lot of time, if you don't have...
Yeah, you need to devote a bit of time to the game. It's not one for one sitting, for sure. The second level alone will... I mean, the second level's great, but it will wear you down because it's about an hour long.
Especially if you're not used to this kind of game, because you're going to have to learn the controls, and they should be intuitive, and it's weird. And I'm like, I know these controls. You hold this button down and you do this, and then I always do it wrong. It's like... you're sitting there like, okay, all I have to do is press C, and then I'll take my gun out, and then I press A, and I'll shoot the guy. That's it. I just need to do that. And then you walk to the next screen, and I'm like, B, A, C. No, God damn it. Why did I do that? Why did I press those buttons? Something about the controls that just... They're supposed to work, and they should, but I don't know. Maybe I've just been ruined by like another 20 years of other games.
Kind of the dynamics of it do make it easy to just throw you into a tiz, especially when you suddenly come to a screen that you've never seen before, and it's like, oh shit, there's 3 enemies there, just like waiting, and the music then kind of builds up from that of nowhere, and it's like, whoa, shit, panic.
You hit the crouch button, and then you press roll by accident, and you're like, all right, roll off the cliff, done. I've done that no less. And sometimes the game knows it's doing it to you. Sometimes it's just like, I'm pretty sure they're going to press duck here and roll off the cliff. It's going to be great. I'm really hoping they do that. Or when you open a door and there's just a robot that just kills you straight up. Like, come on, game. Please don't do this. But
the murder bot, you mean?
Not the angry killbot cyborg guys who I like. I love their teleporting effects. Very cool, clever, like execution. Okay, so we've got Ranger X, and that's at 51. Is this Ranger X in this one? What is...
I'm thinking maybe between Bushido Blade and Full Throttle.
That sounds fair to me.
Okay. I have no arguments. I trust your judgment more in placement here, actually, than anyone, so...
Shame I wasn't here to discuss Bushido Blade. God, I love that game.
Everybody loves Bushido Blade that has come on to this
It's
show.
a great one. Anyone who sees Bushido Blade is like, yeah, Bushido Blade.
It's one of my childhood favorites.
I don't think they usually want to put it higher. They're just like, I love Bushido Blade. It's like, yeah, it's great, but it's janky, and so we can't put it any higher.
It's a rough diamond, but it's really innovative, so... Yeah.
But, no, I think between Bushido Blade and Full Throttle is good. I think Flashback is a game that had some very strong influences and really meant a lot when it came out, because even just like I saw this game as a kid, I saw it, in magazines. I think I saw like short like videos and tiny previews on like, I don't know, like shows or something. I was just like, whoa, what is that? Like how like this game is just so different and so interesting looking compared to, everything else, which was edge and colors, and it's just like, whoa, like it's so evocative. But I think it has way too many like frustrations just buried in there, constantly just jabbing into you to be like, yeah, but I tried to finish it again for this, and I was like, I got to the prison. I was like, nope, no, I'm done. I can't. I just can't do it. I can't. I know what's gonna happen. Even if I get through the prison, I gotta get through Alien World. I don't want to do this anymore. But I do love this game, and I do think it's well worth playing because the early part of the game is very, very good. And
yes, the first half is better than the second. I'd agree with that.
And and you'll see like, wow, this is really interesting for this time period to be making this game instead of making wow, there were a lot of mascot platformers, and this is the antithesis of that. It's the completely different thing. You got your guy in a jacket and jeans. That's so cool.
Yep. Okay. So so we have agreed that Flashback is number 58, just between Bushido Blade and Full Throttle. Its quest for a place in the top 47,858 games of all time is now over, and so that shall end this segment, I do believe. If all is good with that.
Yes, ma'am.
No problemo.